some technical issues that we are trying to solve. In the meantime, I would like to encourage everybody to sit down so that we can start as soon as the technical issues have been solved. And in the meantime, I will tell you some good news. But before the good news, I have to ask you something. The interpreter equipment people are telling me there is one headset that is missing, and unless I give it to them, they are going to report me to the police. So if you want me not to be at the police station, please hand it back to them. The next thing is a good news. The Ministry of Innovation and Technology is kindly inviting us for a dinner here at the Hilton, probably at this place this evening. So you are all invited for dinner this evening. So thank you very much, Ministry of Innovation and Technology. And I hope that the State Minister of ICT, in charge of ICT, will be here around us this evening. The next good news is that Internet Society is inviting you to the Unity Park tomorrow afternoon. So Unity Park is, I don't know, for those who are not from Ethiopia, you might not know it, but it's more than a park. It's the history of the government of Ethiopia in the last 100 years. Not very far from here, the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, made it a park, but it's the whole history of the previous governments that you can see there. So I really encourage you to go. Internet Society is inviting you. It will probably take 3 hours or so in the afternoon. We are going to go from here at 2:30 p.m. And we should be back by 5 or something. It's walking distance from here, so we'll probably walk to there. It's 5 minutes walk or something. Be prepared if you are going with good shoes, so that since there is a lot of walking inside. Please, if you are interested, go and register with Marsema. You might have seen her outside at the registration. You ask for Marsema and put your name on the list. Marsema is there. Show to people who you are. Okay, thank you. I think the problem is solved and we can start. How was yesterday's meeting? Was it interesting? You can do like what they do at IETF, where to say, if something is to say okay, they hum, milalo. So if you find it good, just say, So I think there is agreement that it was a good meeting. I hope that today's meeting will be equally good. Just some changes. I don't know which version of the agenda is on the website, but yesterday we had 2 different sessions before the break. We are going to merge the 2 because His Excellency Minister of State couldn't come today, but he will come tomorrow from the latest news that I have. So his keynote speech will be tomorrow. As a result, we are going to put the first and the second sessions together. So it will be just bringing internet, bringing Ethiopia to the future. And Dawit, Birhanu, Lishan, And yeah, Professor Ndemo has left, unfortunately, but we have an equally knowledgeable friend of mine, Victor Kyalo, from Kenya, who will be talking about the same issue. So I would like to invite the three of them here. The chair of the session will be my good friend Moctar Yedaly. I introduced him yesterday, so I don't need to introduce him again unless he really wants it to. But the only thing that I can tell you is that he's a very good friend of myself as well as of Ethiopia and Africa, and that he's going to be a very good moderator. Victor, can you come here? And Lishan as well. I think I can go from here. Thank you.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Danadaracho. Salam Nacho. Why, that stopped my Amharic up there. Thank you very much. For those who were not here yesterday, my name is Moctar Yedaly. I am the director, head of Information Society within the African Union Commission. So technically speaking, I'm in charge of everything related to ICTs within the African Union Commission. And it's been now 10 years trying to fix something in the continent, and I hope I have done something for the last 10 years. With that, it is an honor and privilege to be the moderator of this session. I have here very prominent and very respectful and knowledgeable people around the table, and it will take me time to introduce them. The subject we are having today is about bringing Ethiopia into the future. Now, what does it mean really today for us bringing any country whatsoever or bringing Africa into the future? You certainly know that we are living in the digital age. Some people call it the fourth industrial revolution, some digital revolution, some digital economy, digital transformation. All those jargons are now becoming such we call fashion. But in summary, it means that we are living in the new context where ICT is actually getting everywhere, getting in our lives, getting into education, getting into agriculture, getting into our own lives, the way we entertain ourselves, the way we work, the way we interact, everything is now ICT related. And for Africa as a continent, this is the greatest opportunity really to use this technology to transform ourselves and to leapfrog into the 21st century and to be equally developed as other countries. ICT is the greatest opportunity we cannot miss. As you may remember, in the 19th, 18th century, when we missed the internet, the industrial revolution, most of us end up colonized. And if we miss the digital revolution, we will end up dominated forever. Because this new revolution is not about mechanics, it's not about armies, it's about everything. ICT is going into our genetics. Today, the evolution, the man now is in charge of its own evolution. We can change DNAs, we can hack them, we can change the way we wanted kids, we change the way we are living. Somebody can say, I'm gonna conserve my whatever element for creation until I get a job or I become 50 or something. And I can also get into the genetics and say, I want twins, or I want this and I want that. So technically speaking, we are mastering now every single thing that is happening. Here comes the issue now of how we're going to interact in that context. The issue of regulations comes in. The United Nations report commended or requested by the Secretary General, the high-level panel on digital cooperation, has mentioned something very important, that we cannot now allow ourselves to do regulation in silo. Every sector needs now to cooperate. And the IT people now have to get involved in the regulations of agriculture, if I may say, or getting into genetics, or getting into education, health, and so on. Regulation has to be adapted to fit the new requirements. Ethiopia as a country, and I was telling the story yesterday, when I first came here in this country, I asked for a SIM card. And I'm told we need to write a note verbal from the African Union Commission. The African Union Commission goes to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. The Minister of Foreign Affairs goes back to the Minister of ICT. And then we go to Ethiopia Telecom and I get my SIM card. It took me a week to get that. And I still have that number, by the way, since that point of time. Now, today you get into the airport, you get the SIM card, and you can even go out and get your SIM card. So you see, Ethiopia has evolved. And I was telling yesterday the story when I came here. Yes, when I came here, was the purpose was to build the VSAT network for AUC to be able to communicate and to access internet, because on that point of time, only 64 kilobit was provided by the operator. And now they are providing them with 10 gigahertz, duplicate from different regions. So Ethiopia has evolved a lot. And specifically now there is a new wave, there is a new change, a new spirit, the Prime Minister has been given the Nobel Prize. Peace is in the way, democracy, expression, and we are now talking about internet development. 5 years ago, Dawit and I were very shaky when we were trying to talk about shutdowns, and now it's not a taboo anymore. So a lot of things has happened. But what can we do more? The new approach is to deregulate or to make the Ethiopian telecom privatized, to open the markets. And Lishan Adams has been involved in this matter. Victor is a good example from Kenya that will be providing. And then we have Dawit also, that was somebody from working outside and in the same time seeing what is happening. So we have a national experience, a neighborhood experience, and somebody who was really looking at the matter from everybody. So with that, I will start by introducing my speakers. I will start by Dawit. And Dawit Birhanu is a founder and CEO of Websprix, a leading ISP in Ethiopia. He worked as a service provider, product development at Cisco system for 16 years. He's the co-author of a Cisco press book, Cisco iOS XR Fundamentals. He has a Master of Telecommunication from University of Pittsburgh. Lishan Adams. Lishan Adams is a researcher and a consultant with extensive experience in ICT, sector analysis in emerging economies. He specializes in broadband access, infrastructure development, policy and regulation, e-government systems and application in sectors like health, education, agriculture, and trade. Initially, he worked at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa in Addis Ababa as a programmer, trainer, network manager, and regional advisor. Dr. Adams served as a visiting associate professor at the universities of Stellenbosch and University of Witwatersrand. It's so complicated. In South Africa, and has a course convener on telecommunication planning and at University of West Indies. He's a member and registrar of ICT Africa Network. Now, he is also somebody I have been working with for the last 25 years. And there is a project I mentioned yesterday on policy and regulation initiative for Digital Africa that we have initiated and built together, and he's been very instrumental for that. Now, Victor. Victor is from Kenya. Engineer Victor is a communication engineer with a wide experience in system design, integration, and project management. He has been involved in the information systems networking telecommunication for the last 25 years. In both deployment of solution of the public and private sector, as well as in training at the university level. He has served as various level, including CEO of Kenet, chairman of KENIC, CEO at the Kenya ICT Authority, PS ICT and Innovation Minister of ICT of Kenya, as well as he served as a consultant in numerous assignments. Currently, Engineer Kyalo is an independent consulting advisor in technology and engineering management for economic growth. I could go on and go on. They have exhaustive biographies. I tried to do last night my homework by getting all their biographies, but they have done tremendous amount of work. So we're going to start with Adams. Lishan Adams will tell us exactly what is the perspective for Ethiopia in terms of really getting into the future. And then it will be supported by Victor, and then we're going to get the opinion from Dawit, right? Dawit will be the first one up. All right, please, go ahead, Dawit, then.
Good. All right. My name is Dawit. I'm CEO of Websprix. Websprix is a private service provider here in Ethiopia. Before that, actually, we have been doing other IT-related services and projects. But our main focus right now is providing internet service. So first I'll go why internet, or why do we need internet, just to lay down some foundations, and then I'll go through some lessons from current events, COVID-19. And then I'll discuss about components of internet ecosystems, and then I'll go through Ethiopia's case. Now, why internet? So, in my view, internet is probably the cheapest way to improve health and education. It is actually much more important in developing countries than in developed countries, because in developed countries, they have better education systems. It's easier to access books, several books. It's easier to access teachers, qualified teachers. Same thing goes for the health system. With internet, when I say internet, any connectivity for that matter, not just the public internet, with connectivity and with the right set of systems, you can easily improve education significantly, as well as health services. So it's really fundamental for countries like Ethiopia to make sure that we have internet access, or access to connectivity to schools, as well as health delivery systems, and to every person. It will reduce digital divide, but more importantly, it can improve these important sectors, both health and education. Now, related to that, with the coronavirus, these are some of the news headlines. First one, the world's biggest work from home experiment has been triggered by coronavirus. So because China has built their infrastructure pretty well, not everybody can work remotely, but because they are also forced to, those who can do remote work, they have started doing remote work, work from home. And that was enabled by connectivity or by since everybody has internet access. Practically everybody has internet access in China. So that has enabled them to do their work, even if they are required to stay at home because they wanted to contain coronavirus. So that's better than just sitting idle at home or not being able to work and not being able to make ends meet. Second one is students are lonely, and what happens when coronavirus forces schools online. And there it discusses some of the negatives as well as the positives. Because these are school kids, they need some guidance. Because this was done in a rush way, they're not able to guide them properly. So some of them may not do their homeworks properly. But a lot of them are doing their education. They are not, I believe almost practically everybody is doing their education from home using video conferencing with their teachers. And that's a big thing. So otherwise they would have missed classes altogether. So this has enabled them to do their classes online. It was forced by coronavirus, but if they didn't have the connectivity, if they didn't have the systems in place, they would not be able to achieve this. Same thing, third one, online classes trying to fill election gap, education gap during epidemics. Same thing there as well. So you can see that education has helped, connectivity has helped fill the gap during this crisis, which forced the government to lock down people in their locations to stem the virus, basically. This is in addition to they being able to locate everybody, which has a positive and negative side, but at least they are able to locate everybody, get their everybody reports where they are and so on. There are some privacy issues there, but if it is done properly, that's also a huge advantage. Now, going to the internet ecosystem, basically at a basic level, it is a user, a device, connectivity, and then content. So it is a mix of this and how these are interacted that we call the internet ecosystem. So the user, sometimes the user may not be involved. It could be just a car communicating with another system to do something. But a user basically interacts with the device, and how they are able to interact with the device and how intelligent that interaction is also important. Same thing, the device being able to interact with the content and how that interaction is done in an intelligent way. That's basically the ecosystem and the interaction. And then to enable this, all the experts needed, the laws, regulations, the alliances, this type of conference is also fundamental for this, advocacy groups, and being bold enough to experiment with few things. So that's the overall ecosystem. Now, coming to Ethiopia's context, if you look at the numbers, the metrics, the numbers are not that good for Ethiopia, and for a number of developing countries, but the numbers are not good for Ethiopia. So I'm just focusing on Ethiopia here. So whether it is data usage per user, or how many bytes a user is consuming per month, or how many megabytes per month on average per capita consumption, or the price per bits or per megabits per second, or the average speed of connection, or number of people who have broadband access, and so on. All the numbers are not are really far below what we want it to be. So that is, of course, a disadvantage, but it is also an opportunity. So it is an opportunity to think differently, to architect it in a different way, to make it much more efficient. And I'll come back to that later on. So that takes me to the second part, which is learn from the experience of other countries, but do not follow their paths. Because there is usually a much better, a much shorter path to get there. And that's enabled because of Moore's law. So Moore's law basically impacts how small silicon gets, 40 nanometer, 14 nanometer, 10 nanometer, 7 nanometer. We're going in a couple of years to 5 nanometer. So as that size decreases, a number of things change. Costs per capacity, in terms of storage capacity, reduces significantly. Size per capacity reduces significantly. Power consumption per capacity reduces significantly. Same thing for performance. Cost per speed or performance reduces significantly. Costs per, size per, to achieve a given amount of performance reduces significantly. Same thing also, power required to drive a specific amount of performance reduces significantly. So when a country, if they did it perfectly even at that time, the plan that they used to achieve that was based on a different silicon technology than what we have today. So we cannot follow that path. We should not follow that path. We have to follow a new path. We have to seek that optimal path given the current situation. So that's very fundamental to, and it requires a different way of thinking to achieve a better optimal implementation than just to follow what one very successful country did 5 years or 10 years ago. Because when they did it 10 years ago, it was a different cost per bit, different cost per or size per bit, and a different technology. So it is very important that we devise new ways and new mechanisms of leapfrogging to a faster, to a better connectivity, a better ecosystem. Another important item is we're happy that with the deregulation, opening up of the market is very important. Allowing other international companies to come and play vital role is important, but equally important is being able to build local capacity, being able to encourage local entrepreneurship in this ecosystem, and also building the technical capacity locally. That's very important for a thriving, long-term digital ecosystem. Another one is very unique. I wouldn't say unique, but it's a characteristic of European investment, essentially in the IT sector. There is a trend, not a trend actually, there is a culture that if I'm going to do something, I'm willing to invest significantly in technology and systems, but not in human capital. And that is, that's really a big problem. We need to get away from that culture. In most of the cases, we also do some enterprise projects, and you will see that significantly that there is a tendency to invest heavily on technology, on sophisticated technology, but not the manpower to utilize that sophisticated technology, to make use of that sophisticated technology. And the funny thing about technology is the more expensive the technology is, it is very difficult to operate, particularly in the enterprise world. It's usually very difficult to operate. It requires significant experts. So what they end up doing is they'll buy very expensive tool sets and probably, let's say, a tank, and to kill a mouse, right? Because they don't have the expertise to actually drive the tank and do the effective things that they need to do. So it's fundamental to shift investment from just investing into capital, into systems, towards a human capital, training, retaining, paying the technical manpower. And one of the problems also here is you'll find top talent, but usually they will end up leaving the country because there is a higher pay out there, and that's the fault of the ecosystem that we tend to invest a lot in systems, but not in human capital. Another important that's important to me personally, but it's important for all of us. We need to focus on the education, on education, not just educating, but on the education system. And we can make, as I said, this is connectivity is the cheapest way to enhance education significantly. So it is the responsibility of every one of us as citizens. It's the responsibility of the industry and the businesses, as well as the government. And it has to be a collaborative effort. We cannot say, there's this one entity that's responsible for education and they should do it. And I'll put it as a challenge. Let's work together to connect every school. Not just connect, enable them to utilize that connectivity. And it sounds difficult, sounds challenging, but it's not. It is achievable, but it requires collaboration. It requires commitment. But once we have that, that's the next generation. It's difficult for maybe we are in the field, but for most people after a certain age to learn quickly and adapt to new technologies. But it will be much easier for the school kids to learn and catch up with technology. The fastest way to bridge the gap, the digital gap, is to focus on education and focus on connectivity, connecting every school. And that's achievable, as I said. I'm personally committed. My company is also committed. So I believe I'm done. So I'll challenge you on the education side. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dawit. I really like the way you have illustrated the role of internet by comparing it to COVID-19. The recommendation on the lesson to learn from others is very good. The fact that also Ethiopia is still really lagging behind, and we need to do something about it. That make us a very good need to change on our investment culture by really investing in HR. And I will just paraphrase you by saying, train them well that they can leave you, and treat them well that they can stay with you. You can do that. Capacity building, connectivity required cooperation. At the main point I have written for now, but we'll come back again to ask you more questions. Thank you. So we can keep on chit-chatting while waiting for Adam Suridi to get his presentation up. At a certain point of time, I will be asking very diplomatically provocative questions. Does it sound good to you? And one of the questions is, for you to think about. In China, there are several operators. The market is open at the national level. Most of the CEOs are appointed by the government. And there is a fierce competition among those operators, and they are providing really competitive services and so on. Can Africa adopt that model? Or shall we continue to adopt the model that is now, open the market for everybody and have most of your operators owned by foreigners? So that's a question you have to think of, and give me some hints at the end. Adam, are you ready? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm back here today with the success and failure and monopoly region in Ethiopia. I come from a group called Research ICT Africa also, because I have so many hats. And through the Research ICT Africa, we have been tracking the development of internet, the regulatory frameworks in Ethiopia for the last, 20 years. So we have been doing some research. So what I will be presenting is my personal experience and research and facts. So based on the different facts that we have. So and I give you a lot of context of what is going on in Ethiopia. I think it is very good for people from this country to really understand what is happening rather than just speculating. So because data and facts is very critical for you to really to make things move forward. So what I will be doing is I'll just give you a fact across the last maybe 20 years, what is going on, and then what will happen in the telecom sector in the future. Some of you may have read some of the publication that comes out of the Research ICT Africa. So if you want, you can continue reading after my presentation. Generally, when we do for the internet access, we are very much interested in availability, accessibility, affordability, the ability of people to use those internet systems, and then you are aware of the opportunities, and then you use, and then you have to have some kind of quality of service. But for this to happen, you have to have a lot of things around it. So you have to have policies and regulation. You have to, of course, you have to invest in the infrastructure, and then you have to have good institutions and leadership. And then you have, as Dawit was saying, local ICT sector, innovation in the sector. And then you have to continuously adjust your policy, because your policies actually drive the investment in the sector. So was Ethiopia doing this over the last, 20 years? What has been happening? Why all these indices, all this data shows that everybody says Ethiopia is low? At least Dawit was referring to that. So we were going through a transition over the last 20 or so years. So this transition I divided into 4, based on the research we are doing in the Research ICT Africa, I divided into 4 phases. The first phase is like what we call the golden phase, kind of a pre-internet phase. And the second phase is what we call the cash cow telecom as a cash cow phase, because this one I got it from one of the ministers who said, telecom imutatalab lamnat. Perhaps you remember somebody who said that. I don't have to disclose the person. Anyway, somebody said that telecom imutatalab, that means in English it is kind of telecom is a cash cow. So I used that one. So there is an era where the government thinks that this telecom is like a cash cow. Then there is an era where the government said it's no more the cash cow, so we have to somehow catch up. Let's catch up with other countries. And then we have the current era where government start to kind of reform. I just go through these eras and then try to give you like what has been happening. So the pre-internet, that's the golden years. You have telecom, which has been going on for the last, 100 years, since Menelik time. And then the Ethiopian telecom is kind of self-satisfied. They said, we have been here, we are the best, and so on and so on. But at the same time, during that time, they had some good management, maybe pre-1996. And then what happened was there was some initiative by the ECA to introduce internet low-cost communication to Ethiopia. I think Anret referred to that. There was Padisnet. This is where we have the largest user. I used to be like what they call the system operator for the Padisnet. And during that time, we were also trying hard to bring internet to Ethiopia. Dawit, myself, a couple of people, we put together a group called Byte. So we try to bite, the telecom company so that they bring internet to Ethiopia. So that was like a golden era. But during that time, what happened was there's a lot of reform across the world, especially in Latin America, Peru, countries like Chile. So those countries have a lot of reform because there was a drive for privatization. So Ethiopia was a socialist government at that time and transitioned to the EPDRF government. So there was a lot of kind of socialist mentality. So that I think we missed that opportunity where everybody trying to reform. So we were not able to reform that. So we were not really moving in that direction. So then we moved on to the cash cow era. The cash cow era, basically, that's where mobile and internet were introduced, and the government thought that really mobile sector is like a good thing. They generate a lot of revenue out of it, so let's not reform. Let's the government continue operating the telecom sector. So during that time, but because the government wants to really kind of flex the muscle, so basically they introduced a lot of policies and regulation during that time, and then established 5 different institutions. The telecom operator, because it became more stronger, public monopoly, so they created the Ethiopian Telecom Corporation, and then you have a government regulator, basically, which is kind of under the Ministry of Transport and Communication, and then there is another agency, IT Development Agency, which is kind of an e-government type of institution, then the Broadcasting Authority, and finally the INSA, the Information Network Security Agency. So during that time, as you can see, they have a lot of regulation. Basically, those regulations, those texts, those documents, those laws are just basically reinforcing monopoly at that time. So they were not really like basically reforming and basically reinforcing monopoly at that time. So the government in Ethiopia actually missed out of that reform process both in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. So we kind of closed, and then the institutions were actually kind of arranged like this, where you have the prime minister, and then all of those institutions are actually part of the government. For instance, the telecom operators falls under the government, and then of course the de facto regulator, which was actually a department of the Ministry of ICT. So basically the government became an operator, the government became a regulator, the government also became policy maker. So you cannot do 3 things at the same time because you have to have an independent regulator. So at that time, that's why institutionally it's a monopoly. So the EBA falls under the Ministry of Information, and the EICTDA, the IT Development Agency, falls under the Ministry of Capacity Building. What was happening at that time? You can see there was a bit of growth when the mobile was introduced around 1999. There was a pickup around 2003, and you can see internet was completely flat. So during the monopoly time, we were not able to actually increase internet penetration. So we were really very slow, lower than the African average, and then lower growth. Another interesting implication of the monopoly during the time was that there was a lot of unsatisfied demand. People were actually on the waiting list to get to the phone. The ETC at that time was actually having a register where they would just kind of register everybody who wants to get access to telephone, who wants to get access to fixed line. So you can see that has just kind of calmed down as the technology increased. So that period, the demand was not satisfied, and by 2006, the government said, okay, what are we going to do? Because there are a lot of people on the waiting list. We have a very high demand, so what are we going to do? We have to really invest on infrastructure. There are two options at that time for the government: either to involve private sector, to invest in the communication sector, or for the government to actually invest by itself. So the government actually chose the later one, where they say, okay, let's borrow some money from China, from the Chinese Exim Bank, about $1.6 billion, and invest in infrastructure. So by 2006, the government borrowed that amount of money, and basically from the Chinese Exim Bank, and then say, well, let's roll out the infrastructure. So during that time, of course, the government was thinking that maybe this is a cash cow, but that didn't happen because, when you normally get revenue, you might get the revenue from the high end of the people, the society. As you go down, as everybody start to get communication, the average amount of revenue you generate kind of comes down because the low end of the population may not be using the telecom system for a long time. So the government also, at that time, they invested a lot of money. They also tried to look for the management of the company. And because of the monopoly, we also see the quality of service has been coming down. Then we moved on to the third phase. The third phase is where the government said, okay, now we borrowed a lot of money, and we are not seeing a lot of impact. So what are we going to do? We have to really continue investing on infrastructure because the demand actually increased. Because everybody started to get a mobile phone, and then the demand increased. And then you have to catch up with the African average at the same time because other countries have introduced, like neighbors, Kenya had a lot of operators, and every country has like this penetration going very high, and then the government wants to move forward. So during that time, the government borrowed additional 1.6 billion. With the first one, it's 1.5 billion, so it became 3.1 billion dollars, and then try to really expand the network. And then they try to also, because now they have a huge amount of infrastructure covering across the whole country, even the farmers and people in the rural areas worked on really digging the trenches for about 6,000 kilometers of fiber, which is really a fantastic thing to do. Of course, some of the farmers know now where the trenches is. One of the challenges that the ETC has is that there is a lot of vandalism on those trenches. And because the farmers actually see there is a trench there, then you can cut and maybe sell it. But in practice, you cannot sell it. This is a fiber. So it's really a very difficult situation, even using them, because there wasn't a lot of awareness in terms of how to protect that infrastructure. So during that time, there was also a lot of work in terms of changing the management of the telecom, because now you have to bring also a new institutional management system. So they engaged France Telecom to actually manage the company. And then there's a lot of activity around that time because there is enough bandwidth, so they have to also bring in maybe the Ethio IT village, and then they have seen increased revenue. So what has happened during that period? As you can see, we were tracking what has happened. So there was a growth in terms of mobile penetration, also you can see the internet penetration picked up during that 2008-2018 period of time. So we have really gone relatively very high. See on the 2016, 2017, actually the mobile picked up to 61.6 on the data that ETC used to publish. But all over a night, the ETC said now they have to really get rid of 18 million SIM cards because they were actually reporting data which was kind of false, because some of the SIM cards were not functional, there is a duplication which has been accumulating over the last, I don't know, since they have introduced mobile phones. So the data basically kind of skewed down since 2017, 2018. So currently we think that about 43% of the population, around 45. I looked at the data, the latest data, about 45% of the population have access to the mobile phones. Again, if you see, even with that investment, we are not really close to other African countries. The reason is because you cannot really fast economic communication sector growth simply by under a monopoly situation. So you have to really introduce competition so that you get like more access to innovation, also more penetration. So if you see, we are still in the bottom. This is a data from 2017 in terms of development index, in terms of mobile penetration, in terms of internet penetration, in terms of also fixed broadband penetration. What is interesting is in terms of pricing, because we have one monopoly operator, so the prices tend to be very low. If you can see, you know, this is the data from the Research ICT Africa, where we track mobile prices across the continent. You can see Ethiopia's price is just on the top, on the lower end. The reason for that is not because artificially the prices are set really very bottom. But again, when you look at those prices are relatively high, because the price doesn't mean anything unless you compare it with the income of the population. So if you kind of compare the income of the population, for instance, the amount of money a nurse or a school teacher or somebody earns, or an average income, then it just doesn't make sense. So currently, this price is relatively high when you compare it to the income. What happened to the quality of service? Of course, I think all of you agree with me. This is one of the lowest quality of service because of the monopoly. Internet is one of the lowest quality of service. You get one of the lowest quality of service in terms of internet. Of course, you have this frequent disruption and shutdown. Of course, the government was citing disinformation, misinformation, and then, you know, the popular quote of everybody quoting this, where the Prime Minister was saying, when security is at stake, internet is not a water, or internet is not air, for instance. So even at the policy, at the higher policy level, under a monopoly regime, you can actually shut it down, or you can just kind of open it. So I think this is, we have a big debate on that one with some of the researchers, because we are looking at internet shutdown, whether, you know, internet is compared to the water or compared to the air. But I think this requires a bit of study, whether this is because there's a right issue in it, a legal issue in it, and so on and so on. So we have to do a bit of study whether to prove otherwise. But I think this quote will give you an idea that the government can actually shut it down whenever they want. And then one of the most important thing is the bandwidth. Because Ethiopia buys the bandwidth here from Kenya, this way from Djibouti, and this way from Sudan. So basically they combine three connections together, which is kind of redundant. but at the same time, the bandwidth is generally very low. Now, especially if you compare it with the neighbor Kenya, for instance. Kenya has a population of about 45, 50 million people. I don't know the current one. That Ethiopia has about 102 million. So for that number of population, we have 70 gigabits in 2019, and then Kenya has about 11, basically 1,150 gigabits. So you can do the math by yourself in terms of the amount of innovation that we are missing because of also the low bandwidth. So what are the implications during this catch-up period? The government was able to actually, through that $3.1 billion, engaging both the ZTE and Huawei to actually build infrastructure across the country. This is really good. And then, of course, at the expense of debt, at the expense of innovation. Because there's a huge debt on the population because you have to pay it back. This is a debt, it's not really a grant. So, and then of course, at the end of the day, then the government kind of faced a shortage of foreign currency, then because the debt was accumulating, so that they have to pay it back. And then of course, there is a lot of, that has also implication in terms of the development of the application. So the government now faced a challenge. Then, of course, there is some pressure from outside, international development companies, development agencies, but at the end of the day, in 20th century, you have to reform. So currently, what is going on is the fourth phase. The fourth phase is basically, let's reform. Let's break the rule. Let's reform. So in 2018, the Prime Minister announced the liberalization of the sector, then the Parliament passed this law, and then created a new regulator, independent regulator, and then currently efforts are underway to partially privatize the incumbent, and then at the same time also to bring in some more companies into the country. I think this is really, really something fantastic happened to the country at this juncture, because this is going to improve economic growth, productivity. It's going to unleash a lot of innovation in this country. We might be able to actually attract a lot of jobs in the IT sector. And then we will, I think one of the things that we have missed over this 20 or so years is the financial inclusion. Using mobile, the M-Pesa type of financial inclusion. And then of course, it will unleash a lot of participation in the use of technology for health, education, and agriculture. But the reform itself is not something which is given. So it has its own issues. Because we are really reforming after so many years, and that experience, innovation, everything was lost over the last 20 years. Here are some of the issues. I just kind of finish with the issues. First of all, we have to have 3 operators, Ethio Telecom, part of the new licensee. Of course, then they have to, during the licensing process, I think they have to also ensure some sort of community participation in terms of provision of the services. ETC was thinking that they maybe, we have 15,000 Kabbales. Kabbale is kind of the lower administration in Ethiopia. So ETC tried to really kind of get all this communication to those 15 Kabbales. But we think that this can be done by people like some of the entrepreneurs here, people like you. And we would like to see the license also encourage community participation, local participation, so that people take the capacity and then deliver services on the local area. And maybe there are some tower companies, so there are issues related to tower infrastructure by the electric company and the railway company. They want to also participate as a licensee. So there's a license have to also give them some provision for that. And then the other issue now on the table is, because of the monopoly, the ETC actually got all the spectrum. So they have to now reallocate because that was kind of initially there was a hoarding by Ethio Telecom, so they have to really take some of the spectrum and then reallocate, and then of course the spectrum has to be priced, and then there should be some fee. Then they have to figure out how to really give that spectrum out, whether this is an auction or just simply they allocate that spectrum. And then there are issues in terms of obligation. For instance, if these three companies come in, what are some of the issues? Should they cover, or should they allow entrepreneurs like ourselves to actually cover the whole country? How can they compete with each other, for instance? How can they interconnect? Where is the interconnection point? What are the fees? And so on. All of these have to be sorted out. Because the Ethio Telecom is now in the market, so it is a significant market power, so they have to really regulate that. The Ethio Telecom majors refuse new companies to interconnect at an interconnection point. So they have to figure out, because that has to be done through commercial arrangement. So they have to figure all of that out. And then when these new companies come, they have to put their towers, they have to lay cable, and so on and so on. So that also requires access to right of way. So we have to figure out, how do they access to the land, whether they have to really relocate some of their equipment at the Ethio Telecom premises. So there are a lot of issues. And then for what lesson we have from similar projects, for instance, we have a railway project which has been delayed for years because people have to vacate the land for the railway to go through. So those experiences are important. So those are some of the issues. And then, of course, issues related to interconnection, what kind of arrangement in terms of fee, and so on and so on. And then finally, they have to talk about universal access. Okay, these three companies should have some kind of obligation so that we get access broadband to almost everybody in the rural and underserved areas. So you have to understand the current access situation on a geographic basis, and then try to really get that so how can it be? Maybe they have to collect some universal access fee. So how can we collect how much that fee is going to be? How are we going to disperse? All these issues have to be discussed. Then they want to privatize Ethio Telecom. So there are some positive and negative implications of its privatization. For instance, if we privatize, there's improvement in terms of innovation, quality of service, and so on, but it also has some negative implications. The bottom line of all this is to have a good regulator. What we have seen from other countries, other African countries, is that when these issues of reform comes, there should be a good referee. Because there are so many issues. So the real companies come from here, and then you have to allocate resources, infrastructure, and so on and so on. So one of the major challenges now Ethiopia is facing is to have a good regulator that has a capacity, and it shouldn't be necessarily independent. It's not going to be independent anyway overnight, but it has to have that capacity. First of all, it has to be staffed by experts from multiple fields. You need a legal expertise, you need economic expertise, maybe a bit of IT expertise. We did some study 2 years back looking at the SRD. This is a standard regulatory department of the one which is actually doing the regulation. The regulator, those generally staffed by IT experts. So it's not an IT issue. You can see some of the issues are more of legal and so on and so on. So those are very important. Then, of course, you have to train these people. You have to have be transparent, and then, of course, you have to consult and so on and so on. So what is happening over the last 20 years is that we have seen that originally there was some optimism in the 1990s where we were really having this BITE thing, bringing internet to Ethiopia, but Ethiopia went through the period of stagnation, kind of went down, and then now there was some time for reflection and we came back. This has costed the country in terms of innovation and economic growth. Our population grew very fast from, I think, 79 million at that time, today to 100 and maybe 105 million. But during this time, the innovation stagnated. So we were not able to really attract a lot of jobs in this sector. But the future is bright, but it has to be managed. Of course, we really need to have that capacity to manage the future. Thank you.
First, it refused to get on, and then it's beginning very high level of signal. Thank you, Adams, for this bright and nice picture you have provided about Ethiopia, and specifically with regard to the different phases and eras through which the sector has evolved, the golden, the cash cow, the catch-up, and the break the rules era. Very nice pictures have been presented about what has been done and what should be done, specifically by a good conclusion about the fact that the future is bright and all we need is to address the right issues of spectrum, access, right of way, land management. I'm keeping chit-chatting in order for you to get your presentation up. And then specifically, we need a good regulation. Without good regulation, we will not be able really to make it. One thing has struck me really in one of your slides, and how come Mali has 127% penetration access for mobile? You don't have to answer that now. You will answer that later on. And again, was really the investment strategy really done by Ethiopia properly, specifically when innovations and have been lost. So if you are ready, we can go, and then Victor, the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to try to fit into Nemo's big shoes. Physically, I know he puts on number 11. I'm on number 6 shoes. So it's going to be a bit tough, but on short notice, I've tried to put up something together. Now, I want to look at my short presentation and summary of what you can learn from what we did in Kenya in 2 parts. What I'll call the pre-takeoff and the post-takeoff. Starting from around 1998, 99, up to around 2002, and a period from 2007 when things really took off. Pre-takeoff, I think we had similar challenges as what I'm seeing and I'm hearing being mentioned here. Most of us, and some of my colleagues are in this room, started from different sectors with very different objectives and ideas on where we should go. For instance, I was in the academic sector, and my biggest pain was to connect universities, especially creating an education network. And the frustration then was the cost of connectivity. We had liberalized the market, but we had a monopoly who was protected by government, such that you could not connect to any international bandwidth without going through the then Telecom Kenya. And it was really expensive, poor, and it took a lot of time to get any connectivity. So I would say from where I used to sit, I was more of an activist who never liked government. Actually, at times I get surprised that I stayed in government for 2 years later in my life, working and advocating for some things. We also had some groups, especially the ISP team, which was looking at things from a different perspective. Their business could not work because the biggest impediment and barrier to their business was, again, the incumbent operator and the conditions which the regulator had brought on board. So they were hurting in terms of their business despite investing their hard and cash. Then there were groups which were looking at regulatory and policy issues, and they felt shortchanged by government because it was not listening to some of the good ideas which were coming in. By around 2002, somehow things started coalescing. People started listening to each other, and we started having conversations with government, which was a bit surprising because you want to bash government, but they're telling you, no, come, let's sit down and have a chat, and let's see what we can do. 2003 for me was a very interesting year because I prepared the vice chancellors of the 5 big universities in Kenya, and we were going to fight with Telkom. But the minister then invited us for breakfast with the regulator and the operator. And actually, instead of us having a fight, we had a very good discussion where prices for the university were slashed by 75% in one morning breakfast. And the idea was we should not talk about it. It should be a confidential document. But because we were already working with the ISPs, we were able to share the same information with the ISPs, and we realized actually prices can come down. Fast forward 2007, I happened to join the government, and my boss then was Bitange Nemo. And by that time, a lot of strategies and ideas had already coalesced around, and we knew a number of things that we needed to do. We had a lot of ideas on what to do in the infrastructure. We knew the international connectivity had to come down. We knew the backhauling of connectivity within the country had to come down. And we knew as a government, we had no role to play in the last mile. We wanted to leave the last mile for the operators and the ISPs. So it was very clear in our head the things that we needed to do and the things that we needed to leave to the private sector. And this was a refinement of the policies and regulation and strategies which we had managed to achieve by working a lot with the private sector in different groups. So I've tried to summarize the things that we thought about and the things that we felt we needed to do. And in 3 key areas, we wanted to enhance public value by making sure that using connectivity, we can deliver services to the citizens. And our targets were, in some areas, 100% people should be able to access government services, establishments, as well as the public sector. The idea here was that if we started from the outcomes, what do we really want to see? Then we would work backwards to see whether what we were doing in the infrastructure domain was actually making sense or not. Because we were at the same, around the same time we were negotiating with government for budgets, which were not very possible. So we needed to convince them that we are going to use the little money that they give us to enhance the delivery of services and to get satisfied citizens. We wanted to develop the ICT businesses because, again, that was a key stakeholder in what we were going to do. And we knew that by getting businesses to work, eventually government will get out of the business of doing business and leave the private sector to do some of the things that we wanted to do. And we wanted to strengthen ICT as a driver of industry. We wanted to see the growth of IT-enabled services within the economy. And we knew that will provide sustainability because taxes collected from that sector or that area would be able to enable the government to move on. Now, how are we going to do this? We developed a plan, and the leadership of that time was very clear. I don't want to see more than 3-5 activities at any one time. I want you to be very focused, and it has to be business-led because government has limited resources, limited capacity, and we had a very short time to turn things around. Actually, from 2007, 8, 9, the targets were by 2010, we should have achieved most of the things that we wanted to achieve because every time elections come in Kenya, it's more or less a dead period. So we had 3 to 4 years to really get things going. So we wanted to develop the ICT business, which was a key parameter, and we wanted to be globally competitive. And one might look at this and wonder, those have nothing to do with connectivity. You actually cannot be globally competitive and you cannot attract the multinationals into your economy if they cannot get good quality connectivity at affordable costs. So they should be able to set up some of these things much more easily than we can imagine. The initiatives, I think the same thing which was presented by Professor Ndemo yesterday, we inverted the things that we knew were a challenge to us were the things that we gave priority, such as the human capacity, development of an internet market, competency development, which more or less rhymes with human capacity, but I'll show you how we redefined that. Innovation took a key role, but infrastructure, we felt we were at the verge of cracking it around 2007 because a decision had already been made to build an international, to build our own cables, submarine cables. And the challenge was we didn't have enough budget, but we knew what the barriers were. If the government was to, in the initial capital, to move the risk from the cable, we knew we can attract the private sector to come in and take over the cable. So government invested close to 20% of the requirements of the cable in the beginning. And we knew 80%, since we've removed the risk from the cable, the 80% will get the operators and private sector to come on board. And we ceded control. We only sat in the board. We never controlled the board of that cable. And actually that gamble worked. At the same time, we were rolling out a national fiber backbone across the country through some financing from Exim Bank of China. But again, we brought in the private sector, especially the two key operators, Safaricom, Telcom at that time, to be partners in that cable by providing technical expertise and project management, but 0 cent in sum of investment. But they were going to be the key beneficiaries of the cable. For the government side, what we did was to bring in the Kenya Education Network, our research and education network, to actually be a partner in the cable to benefit the universities. So it was a win-win for us and the private sector, such that without having the complete technical team, and up to today, actually, Kenya has never set up a team which really runs the cable. It's still run by the operators, but a fee is paid to the government on a monthly basis, which makes sure the development of the cable keeps improving with time. The innovation development part, we were able to look at very few programs again within each of those areas and see how do we get each of these areas to move. In the market development part, an ongoing project, this is an ongoing activity till today, but the idea here was to ensure that we continuously communicate very effectively to try and attract people into the market. In the human capacity area, the most interesting thing here was for us to ensure that we more or less streamline capacity development, especially starting at the university level, technical colleges, and now we've gone up to the primary schools in building capacity in ICTs. And the capacity here was across all areas, in the literacy of using ICTs, project management, as well as when we look at the infrastructure, or rather the sector competency side, choosing a few areas where we wanted to make sure we go deep into those sectors and have those core competencies which are required. The two key areas that we selected were the infrastructure connectivity or systems admin area. And here we worked with partners. We identified partners like Afrinic, AFNOG, NSRC at the University of Oregon, and others who are able to partner with us in terms of mentorship, as well as providing us capacity to train people in our universities, technical colleges, as well as people in some of the sectors like the ISP area, where we needed to have some deep competencies to drive the sector forward. As well as MNCs, we partnered with people like Microsoft, SAP, Oracle, and the rest to introduce certification in things like software development. And that has actually come to be one of the most sustainable projects, programs that we started, which today is a government-wide, is part of the government-wide internship program where university and technical students engage in something called a presidential digital talent program. They spend a whole year gaining experience and mentorship from people in the industry. The infrastructure side, I think that's where everybody dwells. But for us, I think we were a bit lucky in that somehow we cracked it by those two key projects, the international gateway and the national fiber backbone. Today, I think that still has its own momentum and keeps growing as we go on. Of course, a lot of work is still required to reach most of the parts of the country, but because of mobile penetration, we have broadband widely available in most parts of the country. The innovation bit, I think what really got it working is lack of any blockade from government. Government was fairly open, especially when it came to the open data, which the PS, rather Professor Ndemo talked about. What happened is that the moment you open up the space and you do not really inhibit people to express the things that they can do, then innovation starts growing up. And by the time I was leaving government, I know we had not still finalized on an information policy or strategy, but we had started collecting a lot of information on how to grow that area. The interesting thing in that is that we actually took a risk, got government money and gave grants, free money to the best 10 or 20 projects every year for 3 years. The idea being, if we walk the talk, we'll be able to attract venture capital and other form of capital which flow in to grow the sector. And to some extent, I would say 90% it paid off. We have a lot of people now who are in that sector who are able to bring in money and work with some of the people who have some good ideas. So it's an area where you also have to think about different ways and different strategies on how to grow the ecosystem to allow for people to really express themselves in their entrepreneurial and innovation skills. Lastly, we started creating a toolbox on the things that we were going to do. And this toolbox was very interesting because we had policy, legal, and regulatory things within it. And there we were able to get expertise, at times I would say for fairly low fee, by inviting people to really work with us. That openness of the leadership in the ministry was able to really get a lot of input from the industry to really make sure that we work on our policies and legal and regulatory framework. We always kept joking in the ministry that actually we did much more when we didn't have a policy than when we got a policy. But again, our first cut of policy, we also kept joking that it was very good because they had 2 clauses which I really loved. Under the public-private partnership, after we put everything, the very last sentence there was, or any other model which is approved by the government organs. And actually that's how we built our submarine cable. None of the things that we have said about the public participation, public-private sector participation, was able to work for us. So we had to devise things as we went on and get approvals from the government organs, parliament, cabinet, the auditor office, the attorney general's office as we moved on. So we found that to be a very good clause. Again, when it came to the different technologies, we tried to, there was also another clause which said, or any technology which is suitable. So the rules which were there for 2G, 3G did not stop the regulator from looking at 4G and 5G and the rest. Until the new policy comes into play, we had a bit of opening in that. Then we have linkages to public sector. The idea here was to make sure that whatever the entrepreneurs or innovators or startups start or come up with, it has a home where it can be tried. I think it's much easier for people to make mistakes with their systems in the public sector than in the private sector, where the profit and bottom line determines the survivability of a business. So we opened up in some areas for the entrepreneurs and people in the private sector to actually try their solutions in the public sector. And I think that test bed created a lot of room, just as it did in the education and research network, Kenneth, where we had university students doing a lot of experimentations on the university network. And finally, we had local, regional, and international demand generation. And the idea here was working with everybody in that chain. How do we make sure that when we build the international gateways or the international cables or data centers are put in place, how do you make sure that those facilities are used to the maximum? The risk the government took here was in some areas, the government went in as the, I would say the anchor client. For example, the moment we built a submarine cable, we took 20% shareholding, but we committed we are not going to compete with the private sector. Our bandwidth will only be used for the academic sector and for government use. And even then, our backup will be bought from the private sector. In such an arrangement, the government is walking the talk of making sure the private sector who have put their dollar on the line are assured of some survivability as you move forward. And the toolbox actually has many other components which can grow as the demand in the country or the requirements become evident with time. In a nutshell, I would say that is really some of the lessons we would want to share with Ethiopia. But as somebody said, look at some of the things that we did, which worked. There are very many which did not work. For example, today, I feel we may be having a monopoly in the mobile space. Do you want to take that route? We have our incumbent, because of having been protected for too long, it became a bit, what I would call, not strong enough to fight for themselves in the open, and they've had to take a beating. Do you want the investment which the government has put in Ethiotel to take that route? So there are a number of lessons which are positive. My final one being that leadership is key. At times I feel if the leadership in the ministry in 2002, 2003 did not open up to listening to expertise from outside, and there's a lot of that, and I've worked here for a year and a half now, and I do believe there is a lot of expertise in this country. If you're not open to listening to that expertise, marry it with some foreign or other outside expertise, especially from institutions like AFNOG, AFRINIC, ISOC, and the others who are ready to share their knowledge, then you're creating a recipe which is not very complete. It will still deliver, but you have many gaps. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I had to qualify by one word what has been said by each of the speakers, I would say that Dawit said, change your culture and investment and put emphasis on HR. Lishan Adams, after telling you the whole stories of what that has happened, is telling you good regulations is a key, is very important. And Victor is saying after all those inclusiveness approaches and all those programs, plans, and initiatives, he said leadership is a key. Now, the floor is yours. Can you ask them very pertinent questions? Please. Any questions, please? In front. Could you state your name? And you can ask in Amharic, and then say to whom you wanted to ask the question first. And then we have somebody from there and somebody from the back. Okay, we'll go for the first one. 1, 2, 3.
አመሰግናለሁ ኃይለማርያም እባላለሁ ለዚህ ለኢንተርኔት ሶሳይቲ ኢትዮጵያን ቻፕተር ቫይስ ፕሬዚዳንት ነኝ ለአዲሱ የኔ ጥያቄ ለዳዊትና ለሊሻን ነው እነሱን ነው መጠየቅ የምፈልገው ብዙ ጊዜ ከተለያዩ ሀገሮች ኢንተርኔትን ለመልካም ወይም ለበጎ ነገር ለማዋል ለዲቨሎፕመንት ለማዋል ብዙ ሀገሮች ላይ ኤክስፒሪየንስ መውሰድ አለብን ይባላል ተወስዷልም የተለያዩ እነዛን ኢኒሺዬቲቮች ተወስደው ለመስራትም የተሞከሩት ነገሮች አሉ ግን ኢንተርኔት በተወሰነ መልኩ እያደገ ቢመጣ አሁንም እኛ የተረፈን ኢንተርኔት መጥፎ ፓርት ነው ከዲቨሎፕመንቱ ይልቅ እንደምታዩት የሀገሪቱን የሚያመሰቃቅል ሀሳቦች ነገሮች የሚመጡት በኢንተርኔት ነውና የኢንተርኔት ዲቨሎፕመንቱ በተወሰነ ዓመት እኔም ቴክኖሎጂ ውስጥ ከገባ አንስቶ ዲቨሎፕመንቱ አለ ኢንተርኔት እያደገ ነው ከኢንተርኔት የምናገኘው ጥቅም ግን እስካሁን ድረስ መሬት ላይ እንዳለ ነውና ይሄን እንዴት ታዩታላችሁ ትላንት ለሊሻንም በግሌ ያናገርኩት ነበር
I was speaking to Lishan personally as well, but in the universities now good internet accessibilities are there, but how are we going to use this for development to change the youth when there are facilities, there are incubation centers and the internet exists, but the utilization is negative. How are we going to reform or change that? We always need to change. I'm sure they're not utilizing it in a proper manner. Where I come from, the Gondar University, there's about more than 2 gigabyte internet at hand. But this is not being utilized for development purposes. How are you going to assist us? Thank you.
Please be very precise and concise on your question and to whom it is addressed specifically.
Yes, my name is Wouter van Hulten. I'm from PEX Data Centers. I've been building this in this last 22 years of my career, now doing it across Africa. Like the comments about Kenya and how that market has changed, Victor, much appreciated. I think Kenya is, of course, that it has an ocean shore. What recommendations do you have for Ethiopia, which is landlocked, to open up to international networks?
Thank you very much. And the last question before we go to the second round, in the back over there. Yes, my good friend from Somalia. No, in the back. Yes.
Thank you very much. I just want to first of all thank the presenters. That was quite comprehensive. My question is just a very simple one. All this information is quite very useful, and I'm just wondering whether we are the right audience. In other words, how do we get this information to people who actually make decisions? The same thing yesterday afternoon. A lot of good information, a lot of good stuff. But really the people who should be hearing this are the people who are sitting in other offices, in government offices and ministers and director generals and all those other people. So my question is really, how do we make sure all these good ideas go upwards? Thank you.
Let me talk in Amharic. የመጀመሪያው ጥያቄ በአማርኛ ስለተጠየቀ ወይ በአማርኛ መልሱን ሰጠዋለሁ። ኢንተርኔት
give my response in Amharic. For the negative purpose or conditions, how are we going to use that to be beneficiary to the public in general? As you know, the status quo condition in Ethiopia, especially in these developing countries, internet is being used for certain negative purposes, but in Ethiopia, this is being seen in a bold manner here. What we need to understand is on the problems or the challenges of internet on the online. It's not very different from the offline the problems or challenges. On the internet, there are lots of misinformation and hate speech. And this hate speeches, which is similar to the one we're doing physically on offline. So what the government does here through the reform, due to certain reforms, this stuff is being, it would reduce in the future, I imagine. But we need to educate people on the information literacy and with which information is fact and which information is lie. As Professor Indemo yesterday mentioned, the future development chain technology need to trace back. So like Websprix and others tasks which they are doing as a group or individual, I'm sure it will minimize, and then the problem will be solved, I think. On the development angle, like other countries, like the experience and example of Rwanda needs to be taken. Like Rwanda is a small country, but as I said earlier, government has the leadership there. And then the president is also being done for ICT, for job creation and other positive purposes. So he has gone through this motto. He uses different methods. So he does the Spark, and then he has trains people, and then brings about the external companies. So things being done in Uganda are positive. So if you see it, I can witness because I've seen it. So there are lots of changes being made there. So, for example, there is the incubation there, and that incubation, about 200, 300 people daily have different projects. And then some of the Rwandan companies have already leading in Africa, and even they go abroad, and then we'll get markets. And this shows a concerted government leadership and plan is needed. So I think we need to leave it there. And
issue. Basically, most of the key people, sometimes they just come for the opening and then they just go. So what are we going to do with that? I think we have to plan for that. Because I think the lesson we have learned from Africa, as Victor was pointing to, is the leadership is a key. And also the Rwandan example I was explaining in Amharic, it's just I think the leadership is a key. We have to figure out. I think my colleague Moctar is here. Perhaps we should leverage them to bring some of these leaders for maybe a half-day kind of discussion on some of these issues. You know, take them to one of these big hotels and then bring some of these people with a good experience, charismatic to explain some of these ideas in a very concise, you know, understandable way. Then we might be able to really kind of turn things around. But there is no specific solution. We have been really working around that issue. Thank you.
Lishan Adam, I'll probably do it in English. So as Lishan said, there are the same issues in the physical world, but there are some differences as well. So the difference is in the physical world, for example, if somebody publishes a newspaper, they'll probably be accountable for it, or they'll be accountable to the local regulation. On the internet, on the web, the content is mostly concentrated right now, at least most of significant part of the content is concentrated with the major content providers such as Google, Facebook, Amazon, and so on. And in developing countries, at least they are not accountable to their content. And I'm not sure whether there's a legal framework to deal with that. There are some good developments, at least in European Union and in the US. The regulators have started looking into it, and they'll probably institute some rules, but it's important also for developing countries to be part of that discussion, but I don't think that they are. Without that, you know, I think the key will be to improve productivity in certain settings. It may be better to block. Just for example, in most offices, including our office, we block social media and other activities that are not related to work for a specific period of time. So during lunch break or after hours they can use, but outside that we block it. So I think you can do the same thing in school settings. You can do the same thing in other settings as well. But it's important that content providers also cooperate with local governments as well to institute policies.
Let me just quickly comment on two things. What recommendations would I put in place? I think my first recommendation will be on assessment of requirements, which I believe the Ethiopian team already has in place. But after doing that is to leverage on what is existing where possible, especially in form of capabilities, as well as looking at the sustainability of some of the things that they need to do. Let me qualify that by giving an example. Despite building all the infrastructure that we required in the country, in Kenya, there's one area where we realize the expertise and competencies required for sustainability is beyond what we could do as a government. And that is actually in your area of data centers. And that's why I think yesterday, Prof mentioned that one of the things we did when we wanted to have open data readily available to everybody, we actually sought permission to use cloud services outside the country. Of course, I know now it's been brought back to the country through some of the private data centers which has been built where government has a bit of stake. They've already established connectivity through the partners, or the countries which they partnered with in the neighborhood. So I do believe a very big step there has been taken. But internally, assessment of especially the capacity to keep things going is very important, because the moment you don't get reliable systems, you have a problem. So that's a key thing that needs to be done. And the strategies have to be very well mapped so that everybody is clear on what they are doing. One question which was asked about those people in offices, as much as I agree with what Lishan and my colleague here have said, at times I feel we pay too much emphasis on the senior government officers. It's possible to ignore them at some point and have the masses who are here working on some niche initiatives, which at some point will become visible and useful to some of these people. Let me give an example. Mchuki Mwangi used to work for the Kenya IXP for a very long time. And I do remember one time when the KRA approached us and said, we cannot let KXP go down even for a minute, because our revenues, if we go down for an hour, our revenues disappear by around 500 million Kenya shillings. And I was very happy because I realized all of a sudden, KRA, which is the main revenue collector for the government of Kenya, has realized the importance of some of the infrastructure being built. And I knew this is an avenue to get more funding from government to strengthen some of the institutions that we need to work on. And that was more or less the basis of the .ke movement in Kenya. But this was a small initiative of Internet Exchange Point, spearheaded by ISPs, where government had no role. And from that moment, not only did all government networks become one of what we'd call a vital infrastructure in our ecosystem. So I think we can all contribute one way or another up to a point where we'll start being, people will start seeing the usefulness and how important some of the things that we are discussing here can be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just allow one last question from there. Time is, since he already asked it in the, okay, let's make it two last questions, and I'll invite my panelists to be really, oh, I see a lady over there, so ladies first. There is not many women here, so I have to make some really positive actions. So I will allow the lady over there to have the question. Then the gentleman over there who already had the mic. Then here, the last three, oh, another lady. Man, you are dismissed. So two ladies, positive action. Two ladies, two boys, is that what I'm saying?
Okay.
Okay.
Good morning.
First lady over there.
Good morning. My name is Oni Kamakwakwa. I'm the head of Africa for the Alliance for Affordable Internet, an initiative of the World Wide Web Foundation. Interestingly, my question is precisely about gender. And that is to basically recognize that we have not achieved equality as yet. And it's not going to happen on its own or by being good or meaning well. It requires very intentional, strategic policy direction to actually ensure that we are indeed closing the gap. The digital gender gap in Africa, troublingly, is actually widening for two main reasons. One being lack of affordability, which has a disparate impact on women, as well as online violence against women, specifically, who then select to opt out of being online. That said, how are you recommending mainstreaming of gender in ICT policy to ensure sustainability of, making sure that women are not left behind once again in a revolution, so to speak, that seems to be promising the opportunity for them to have a chance to transform their lives? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very good. The gentleman here. Please be brief and concise and address the question to somebody, please.
ስሜ ሰለሞን ይባላል ከአዲስ አበባ ዩኒቨርሲቲ ነው። የምጠይቀው ለአቶ ዳዊት ነው። ስራውን ስትጀምር ያጋጠሙህ ቻሌንጆች ምንድን ነበሩ? የህግ አግባቦች ነበሩ ወይ? በየቢሮውስ ያስቸግሩ ነበር ወይ? ሁለተኛ ኢቭን አሁን ስራውን ስትሰራ ሊያጋጥሙ የሚችሉ ፕሮሰስም ሊሆን ይችላል ብዙ ነገሮች ምን ይመስላሉ? ቴንክ ዩ።
Lady over there. The lady in yellow.
Thank you. My question is directed to Mr. Dawit. So the first one is, how did you get around providing internet service with limited infrastructure in our country, and what were the challenges? The other one is, what is the mission and vision for the future of Websprix? Thank you.
The man in glass. And that will be it.
Okay. Hello? Okay. Thank you very much. Yesterday, I heard a very critical ambition from the Ministry of Innovation and Technology, saying that in the next 5 years, 70% of the population will be digital literate. Well, that is very important if it is achievable. But my question is, based on the presentations here given in both of the presentations, Lishan and Dawit, don't you think that we have to select sectors where you can make more impacts in the development of the internet? I ask this one because I know the initiatives in Kenya that they had been in the previous 5 years or so, they had been moving toward this availing instruments, tools, computing gadgets to elementary school teachers and high school teachers as well, so that they can be near to information. There is no such initiative in our country. On the other side, we see that those reports says 22% internet access. I don't think that many of the population do have the right tool to have access to the internet and to have access to the information. And that is very expensive for many citizens, and that is also very critical to think about. The other critical issue I think we have to focus in providing solution is access to internet. For many individuals I know, having free access to internet is expensive still. And there must be techniques or some kind of methods so that at least in educational institutions high schools, elementary schools, and universities, that internet be free to the community. What do you say about this?
Thank you very much. Salmon, quickly, please, very brief, to the point.
I know it was not directed to me. I will start with the gender question. So I think the gender gap is a result of policy as well as culture. So it's important that the policy is adjusted. Culture takes a long time. And a good example is if you compare US and China, in the IT sector, women participation, I mean, not as a user, but as a sector, women participation in IT is much, much lower in the US compared to China or other European countries. And that is mostly cultural. I would say probably culturally it's slightly better here than the US. Policy-wise, also I think it's better, but there's a lot of room to improve. Also, as private companies, as well as government, it's important that we make it part of our employment policy, and that's critical. Now, coming to Solomon's question, challenges obviously. Whenever you do something new, challenge that's expected, but I can list some of them. When we started this, it was in consultation with the previous Minister of MCIT, Ministry of Communication and Innovation, I believe, not Minister of Communication and Information Technology, which is replaced now by MINT, Minister of Innovation and Technology. So it took a while. It took actually 6 years after it was introduced as a regulation to become a reality. So we have to be patient for 6 years to get it into practical terms. And then once, and we have to go through lots of back and forth on the model. There were several restrictions that were raised, like for example, initially, we were not allowed to provide service to enterprises, big enterprises. That's taken care of. We were not allowed to provide services using wireless means. That's also eventually removed, and so on. But I'll give you another example. During one of these discussions, I proposed to MCIT that Ethiopia's share of the IP address space is very low, and it's only Ethio Telecom has IP address space allocated to them, and we should encourage other entities to get IP address. And then we gave the data, and they agreed, and eventually we got our own IP address from Afrinic, and I think as it is Ethernet, but that's it. And Ethernet, I think it's after us. So, but I presented that, and the very said that's good, and we got the IP address. But after we got the IP address, Ethio Telecom initially refused to advertise it, and they thought it's a security risk. So it took a while to go back and forth, and eventually they advertised it. So as simple as instead of using their IP address space, just using our own IP address space, it was an issue, and this was from the security team of Ethio Telecom, but eventually that was resolved after consultation. So there are several similar issues. Whenever you do something new, there's always going to be a challenge, and that's expected. So it's not a big problem. The other part is accessibility. How do we increase accessibility? Of course, that's a combination of things. First, we need to expand connectivity. And actually, Lishan initially presented some number, the fixed broadband penetration that was reported in 2016, right? 0.6%, that was reported, that's the wrong number. It's actually in 2016, it should have been probably 0.04%. So, and right now they report the correct number, it should be around 0.1%. So the fixed broadband penetration is very low, so we need to expand that. And it's not that difficult to do. So our vision is to provide broadband service to pretty much anybody. It's important to take into account the per capita income of Ethiopia and price it accordingly and provide affordable service. And that's doable. So the good thing is doable. And it's not just broadband service. It's going to, for us, it's also going to include IPTV service as well. That's also doable. And the reason being, most factor favors us that the technology right now, when you start new, it's much easier to do better service at lower price. And we intend to do that as well.
Quickly. Okay, in 2 words, I think the gender, I think question is well taken, very fundamental. Obviously, as I presented on the first slide, we need to do a bit of research in terms of access of women, the youth, the participation in service delivery, and participation also in innovation. So we have to have a full set of data, so influence the policy, also mainstreaming the ICT policy. The issue in terms of 30% of digital literacy, first of all, I think we have to unpack what this digital literacy is all about. I agree, I could only simply agree with you. Perhaps the digital literacy should start from the education.
Here comes the end of our wonderful panel, and thank you very much. My only conclusion on this is, in order to bring Ethiopia and any other African country in the future, it is very important that more than half of the population, which is women, to be brought in. Bringing women into any project, any endeavor, any activity is not only a moral obligation, but also is a business imperative. We need to make sure that our gender is really included. Regulations today is a key. In order for us to really jump into the future, we need to make sure that any policy and regulation that will be adopted to be modern, inclusive, comprehensive, and specifically flexible to the new changes and so on. The human factor is very important, and the leadership is a key. Perseverance from all of us is recommendable. And remember one thing, it's thanks to a perseverance of one man, Al Gore, that we today all enjoying internet. Thank you very much.
You can stay for a few minutes because I wanted to say something about you. First of all, that I really enjoyed the panel. Maybe it's because these are 4 people I admire a lot. So I'm sure that you have also enjoyed as much as I did. And since I have the mic, I would like to say a few words. Moctar was not kind enough to give me the mic, so I will take it myself. Well, in fact, I'm going to say it in Amharic because I have some words to say about the Kenyans, and I don't want them to hear it. Well, መጀመሪያ ስለ ኬንያ ማውራት ፈልጋለሁኝ. You can. Listen to the okay, there are some Kenyans who don't have the, so they will think that I'm saying bad things. It's not that bad. That to whom we can look up to. They do a lot of things that are very good and that really we can follow. One thing that they didn't do is we never had a war with Kenya. Well, we had war with almost every other neighbor. Another thing is that they can show us some good things in democracy. There are a few decades in front of us. in ICT as well. So you have seen the numbers. I'm surprised. I really have to check that 89% internet penetration is amazing. It's really, Victor, is it true? It's amazing because our numbers, there are several numbers floating for Ethiopia. It is 18.6 and some say 20. I don't know which one is 15, but anyway, they are at least 4 times higher than us, which is, I think, something that we have to fix. We have fixed one thing. Our GDP has surpassed the GDP of Kenya, but not our GDP per capita. We have still some work to do. Something I admire about Kenya is the participation of the public. I think Lishan was saying that we have to have good regulation, but good regulation does not happen because we have a good regulator. The regulator becomes good if there are people who are making sure that it is good. And that is what Kenya had done. I remember a few years back, Alice and her group had to sue the regulator because it was not doing the right thing. So we need to have people, we have a regulator today, which is good, but we have to have Ethiopians who follow what the regulator is doing. When it's not doing the right thing, they have to say it. And I hope that I'm not going to prison for that, but when needed, we have to go very far, including suing it. We have now, I think one of the big things that the government has done is to create a judiciary that is independent from the government, but we have to use it if needed. Okay, I'm not pushing anyone to sue anyone, but an independent judiciary will be useful only if we use it. Okay, we are not there yet. We haven't seen what the regulator is doing, but it has to serve the public. Some of you have asked why the government is not represented here. There are 2 reasons, several reasons, in fact. One, they have been invited. In fact, the ministry has been very, very cooperative. Unfortunately, they had important meetings that you probably know from the news that they cannot escape from. So they are trying their best for the ministry. The regulator, we have tried to reach out to them, but I have never been able to reach to really get a response from them. But I saw some people from the regulator are here, so that is good news. Ethio Telecom, we have sent the invitation. I've called them directly. The minister called them. So if they are not here, it's not because they are not invited, but I don't know, maybe there are some people from Ethio Telecom. If there is anyone from Ethio Telecom, please raise your hand. Okay, so at least one guy, and I know that he was here from the beginning, so that's very good. But they were invited. There is something on the news that they were not invited. That is not true. We invited them. It's another question whether they didn't come. There is, thank you for coming here. Maybe the CEO is not here, but it's her choice. Well, I think I'm done with my comments. Now I would like to say a few things about Afrinic. We are very happy that the chairman of Afrinic was here yesterday. Today we are even happier because the CEO of Afrinic is here. Eddie, can you raise? So Eddie is here. He made sure to come here even though it was complicated. So thanks a lot. We will have the opportunity to hear from him tomorrow at the closing. I don't know if we'll have another opportunity because the panels are a bit crowded, but you will definitely hear from him tomorrow. But also remember that there is a table, an Afrinic table over there. And Brice from Afrinic, you can maybe stand up so that they see you. He's from Afrinic. So if you are an ISP, if you work for an ISP, if you work for any organization who needs IP numbers, which should be everybody, please talk to them. It's a good opportunity to talk to them. Even if you want to, create an ISP in the future, I think it's a good thing if you can talk to them because you need internet numbers one of these days. After that, I would like to invite Varangai, who is chairing the next session, to come here and introduce the next session before we go for the break. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Dawit, for that. So let me take this opportunity, maybe a few minutes, to explain our next session, which I think is going to be very exciting for us. I think this conference will not be complete without your voices, without your contributions. So the next session that we are going to have after tea break is going to sort of lodge us into that perspective, into that context where we are supposed to air our views, air our recommendations. So soon after the tea break, we are going to break into 3 groups, and there's going to be exciting panel discussions that we have. So we have 3 tracks, the development track, the technology track, and the governance track. So I encourage you to pick one track that best applies or is appropriate for you, so that we sort of initiate the discussion there. We have an exciting exciting panelists in those particular tracks. So let me just give you briefly what the tracks are going to be discussing about. So the specific rooms that we are going to get into. So it means after the tea break, we are not going to come back in here. We're going to go break into those particular tracks. So for the last 1.5 days, I think we've been listening quite attentively to the issues. And one of the interesting issues that came up was actually issues around the development of the internet. So we have a particular focus on the development track. And for the development track, this particular session aims to identify the key areas that require deliberate and strategic local development in order to empower local communities. So for this particular track, the discussion is going to be focused around positioning the local workforce, attracting investment, building a stronger internet economy, entrepreneurship, as well as encouraging content providers, both local and local service provision. So if this is a particular track of interest, this will be in the ballroom. So for those interested in this particular track, it will be in here. So after tea break, please come in here. And the moderator will also explain further how the sessions are going to be going forward. We have the governance track. I think yesterday we had quite intense discussion on how to truly become multidisciplinary in terms of the discussions that we have. So for this particular session, the governance session, we are going to explore ways of going beyond working in silos. So if this is an interest to you, some of the issues that are going to be discussed in that particular session, how to create an enabling policy environment, building local institutions, capacity building related to the governance space. So again, I think it's going to be an exciting trick. And please, if you're interested in that particular trick, the room is just at the back, and we are going to be using Nyala, the room Nyala. There are also banners just at the entrance of these rooms, just to direct you to get into those. And lastly, we also do have the technical track. For this particular session, it will identify the technical areas that are challenging to the development of the internet infrastructure. So some of the issues that are going to be discussed in this particular session: the last mile in infrastructure, core backbone, local IXPs, connection with regional and global network, data centers, local web hosting services, as well as some technical capacity building issues. So again, if you have a specific interest in this issue, again, you can follow this track. The room that we're going to be using for this, the technical track, is Hara Grill. And again, we have a team outside to help you direct to those specific rooms. So please, after the break, make your way to those specific rooms, and the moderators will also guide you on how the conversation and discussions are going to happen. Before we leave, Dawit, you have the rooms again. Okay. Again, I'm going to repeat the room and tricks. So for the governance track, the room is called Nyala, which is just behind this room. For the technical track, Hara Grill. For the development track, the ballroom, which is this particular room. If you have any questions, please come see me after. I think we can break for tea. And because we are a bit out of time, I think we're going to reduce our tea break to just about 20 minutes so that we can get some time to discuss. And again, the discussions, we're going to stretch them until 1 p.m. and then we can break for lunch. Thank you.